You said you wanted to know how to get Capone. Do you really want to get him? You see what I'm saying? What are you prepared to do?
Everything within the law.
And then what are you prepared to do? If you open the ball on these people, Mr. Nash, you must be prepared to go all the way. Because they won't give up the fight until one of you is dead.
I want to get Capone. I don't know how to get him.
Want to get Capone? Here's how you get him. He pulls a knife. You pull a gun. He sends one of yours to the hospital. You send one of his to the morgue. That's the Chicago way. And that's how you get Capone. Now, do you want to do that? Are you ready to do that? I'm making you a deal. Do you want this deal?
I have sworn to put this man away with any and all legal means at my disposal, and I will do so.
Well, Lord hates a coward. Do you know what a blood oath is, Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Good. Because you just took one.
You're listening to 91 Reasons, a journey into the twisted landscape of pop culture. Keep your hands and arms inside the podcast at all times. And now, the voice, Jeff Tucker.
Well, I guess we figured out that 2020 is the year that keeps taking away, doesn't it? Keeps taking away and taking away and taking away. Personal freedoms, personal choice, personal this, personal that, and then it takes away personal heroes. And we lost Sean Connery. Man, Sean Connery was a force of nature, wasn't he? Such a great, great film star. What a career. To talk about Sean Connery, I have to actually first talk about Roger Moore. Because when I was a kid and I watched James Bond movies, they all starred Roger Moore. I remember seeing, of course, Moonraker was the first one I watched because it was a lot like Star Wars, and that was on purpose by the Broccolis who made it. I watched Moonraker, and there's James Bond, and he's cool, and he's got gadgets. And then I remember watching, when we got cable for the first time, For Your Eyes Only was on a lot. And I watched For Your Eyes Only a lot. Now, it's interesting because I watched For Your Eyes Only not that long ago, and I was shocked at how slow it is. It goes so slow. It has almost no action set pieces. Very, very little. And that was on purpose because they were doing big spectacle Bond and then smaller, intimate spy Bond movies, sort of putting them one after the other so that the movies weren't exactly the same each time. I didn't realize they were doing that. I've never actually sat down and done a James Bond retrospective. After Hollywood Saloon did it, there's nothing I can add. If you want to hear about all the James Bond movies, look up what I consider one of the greatest podcasts ever, and that's the Hollywood Saloon. They did such an in-depth look at James Bond that really there's nothing else to say about that spy genre. But I remember watching Octopussy. That's a pretty good James Bond movie. It does end with him dressed as a clown, which is, whoever thought of that, I've said it before, that's a baffling decision to end the movie with your suave a secret agent dressed as a freaking clown. But he was James Bond for me. Live and Let Die, The Man with the Golden Gun, The Spy Who Loved Me. Roger Moore was James Bond. View to a Kill. But then one day on TV, I think it was Channel 13 here in LA, KCOP 13, the $1 Million Movie. They used to show movies at 8 o'clock. Every night of the week they would show movies. And a James Bond movie was on. So I thought, I love James Bond. I should tune that in. So when I watched, it was Goldfinger. And it was a different guy playing James Bond. And, growing up, the generation I grew up in, they didn't change actors for movie series. That was very rare. They kept Christopher Reeve as Superman the whole time. They kept Indiana Jones. Harrison Ford was Indiana Jones. It wasn't like suddenly you tuned in and there was somebody else playing the role. So I didn't understand, like, why is there a different guy playing James Bond? And why is he so freaking good? Goldfinger is a masterpiece. It is the watermark of the spy genre. Every movie after Goldfinger wants to be Goldfinger, because Goldfinger sets everything in motion as far as the mini-adventure at the beginning, the witty banter between Bond and Moneypenny, the visit to Q to get the gadgets, the over-the-top plan by the villain, the sidekick with the sexually suggestive name, Pussy Galore, and then the henchman, Odd Job, Goldfinger himself, and then the finale at Fort Knox. It has everything going for it. It is an expensive-looking movie. Every penny is up there on the screen, and it works like nothing before it and very few after it. And Sean Connery is electric as James Bond. He is so good, you forget Roger Moore played it at that moment. Roger Moore's stamp on Bond is great. I'm a big Roger Moore fan. He was a gentleman up until the day he died, and he made some very quality movies. But there's a reason it says Roger Moore as James Bond, and it says Sean Connery is James Bond. Because when he showed up on screen in Dr. No, he's James Bond. And everybody else, good luck. Timothy Dalton had a couple of outings and couldn't fill his shoes. I'm not a Daniel Craig fan in any way. I think his Bond is, he pouts too much. He's way too moody. He never, ever looks like he's having a good time, globetrotting and saving the world. The closest to Connery, I think, is Pierce Brosnan. Brosnan was a fantastic Bond. He is second only to Connery. So mine would go Connery, Brosnan, Moore, Lazenby, Craig, and then Woody Allen, right, from the original Casino Royale as Jimmy Bond. But I remember watching Goldfinger and I couldn't believe who this guy was. And you have to understand, that's understandable, because for a period of time, Connery sort of faded into the background. When he, I may get some dates wrong, I may get some times wrong, but this is just, my perception. This is not a fact podcast. This is an opinion podcast about the late, great Sean Connery. But I think after he came back to do Never Say Never Again, which is the Thunderball remake made outside of the original James Bond timeline, made by the guy who helped write Thunderball and retain the rights. After he did Never Say Never Again, if you see that movie, he looks tired. His wig is terrible. His wig is just awful in it. He looks like he's just going through the motions. He's way too old to be running around as the 30-something James Bond. All of the elements are there for a good movie, but they don't add up to a good movie. And I think he sort of, at that moment, said, I need to regroup, I need to rethink my career, and more importantly, how I look. And the same can be said of Richard Dreyfuss, because look at Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters, and then look at Richard Dreyfuss in Down and Out in Beverly Hills, not that far after, and it's like two different people. And if you look at Sean Connery in Never Say Never Again, and then look at him in the movie that he used to make his comeback, The Presidio, he looks totally different. He suddenly said, look, I'm not a young guy. I need to embrace that I'm an older actor. I need to look older. The presence I have on screen needs to reflect an older guy. And they did that by bringing in Mark Harmon to be the second co-star, or the co-star of The Presidio. If you've not seen The Presidio, you should look it up. It's a lesser-known film. I know it so well because it was a huge rental at the video store. Everybody rented The Presidio. And Connery's great in it. It's also got Meg Ryan in it. It's a pretty good movie. And it showed that Connery could change his look. And a lot of actors have done that. I mentioned Richard Dreyfuss. Also look at Alec Baldwin. There's a guy, look at Alec Baldwin in The Hunt for Red October, starring Sean Connery, but then now look at him today. It's like a different person. It's a guy who said, look, I cannot play the sexy leading man my whole career. I have to transition into an older, almost character actor. Now, Connery never became a character actor. He was a leading man up until he finished his career. And that's saying something. And that's finishing a career on your own terms and having the knowledge to know that it's time to ride off into the sunset. And you know what? I completely respect that. My God, do I respect that. How many actors do we see on screen and pop stars? And you're like, look, we gotta retire. What you're doing is not helping your legacy. And even though Connery stumbled at the end, no one can deny he has one of the greatest film legacies of all time as James Bond, and then the characters he played later in his career. So I thought we'd just go through some of the highlights of his career. I have IMDb up on here, and I wanted to go through a couple of things. I can remember my mother taking me to the Alondra 6, which was the theater closest to our house. It was a really small theater, and they did eventually, like, if you grew up in Norwalk, they became a $1.50 theater, and that was where the second run movies, when they had ended their first run status, they were dumped at Alondra 6, and some of them played there forever. I remember seeing Back to the Future at Alondra 6 for about 6 months, like a long time. I saw it there. But they would occasionally have revival pictures, and in the 70s, revival pictures were pretty popular, especially Disney movies. Everybody knows that they used to release, 101 Dalmatians, The Jungle Book, Peter Pan, Snow White, Fantasia. They would release them into theaters every new generation so that you could take your kids and go see them. This is before home video. This is before movies made it to television. But my mother took me to see Darby O'Gill and the Little People. This is the movie, it's 1959, where Sean Connery sings. He's very young. There's no hint that you're looking at a guy who's going to have a 50-year career in the movies. Like, that's astounding, right? To have a career that long. A lot of actors, especially today where the attention span of people is so short, actors come on the scene, they flare up brightly, and then they vanish. And then they come back a few years later and try to rebuild. Like, remember Jude Law? Jude Law was in every third movie for a couple of years or 3 years. Like, Jude Law movie, here's a Jude Law movie. And then he vanished. And then he came back in Sherlock Holmes, and then he was in Captain Marvel, and he's going to rebuild. There's a point of oversaturation, I should say. Ben Affleck suffered from the same thing, and he had to rebuild from the beginning because he became too famous. There's a thing of becoming too famous, and that happens with a lot of them. And Connery had the wherewithal to know when to slow down. Take a few choice roles here and there. You don't have to be a leading man. The movies you're in are not hitting. Slow down before you're deemed box office poison and you can't make any more movies, because it happens to a lot of actors too, where they're just not invited to the party anymore. But if you go through his career, I don't see another movie until 1962, Dr. No. He explodes on the scene as James Bond. It's like nothing on the screen before. And it's going to be arguably the part that defines his career. This suave, shaken, not stirred, martini-drinking Bond, James Bond, womanizer, secret agent, guy who gets things done, kicks ass. It's hard to describe. Like, Bond is everything that men want to be. We just do. I realize that as a short, dorky guy, I'm never going to be James Bond, which is why I always like watching James Bond movies. They're escapism at their purest form. It's wish fulfillment on the big screen. You go see dramas because you want them to affect your soul. You go see James Bond movies because you want them to affect your adrenaline and go, man, if I was in that place, if I could do that thing, if I could play Baccarat and order a martini. And if you try to do it in real life, you just feel silly because nobody does it the way James Bond does. The next year they did From Russia with Love. I don't think people realize how close the James Bond movies were. 62 Dr. No, boom, sequel the next year, From Russia with Love. Those two movies they're still not the template though. They're getting close to the template, but they're not quite what we think of as James Bond. But they're so close. He did a couple of movies, and then in 1964, Goldfinger comes out, and that is it. That is how you do these movies. That is how you make a fortune. I've read articles that say Goldfinger was the first real movie blockbuster. We hear about Gone with the Wind and making all this money, but Gone with the Wind made its money over it was literally in theaters 30 years. There was no other place to show it. They just kept re-releasing Gone with the Wind into theaters again and again and again and again. It was Wizard of Oz that jumped to television and made its money there. Same with It's a Wonderful Life. Because they didn't sign it on the dotted line somewhere, boom, It's a Wonderful Life became public domain very quickly, and stations could air it around Christmas time for free. So whatever viewership they got was all profit. And that's why those movies endured. But Goldfinger was the first actual blockbuster in theaters. They had to show Goldfinger 24 hours a day to meet demand to see this movie. Remember, there's no megaplexes. There's no, the block AMC with 30 screens. No, there are movie theaters in your town that have 2 screens. A screen and B screen. So they're open 24 hours a day because people want to see Goldfinger at a rate nothing like nothing they've ever seen. They always point to Jaws as the first summer blockbuster, and that's true. But the first just blockbuster movie was Goldfinger. People couldn't get enough of it. It had everything that the audiences couldn't get from any place else. And another thing I like to bring up when I talk about James Bond, and you can't talk about Sean Connery without talking about James Bond, is that James Bond, for action movie fans, was really the only game in town. Up until probably the mid to late 70s, there weren't hardly any other action movies. There were movies that had action in them. The French Connection has an amazing chase in it. Bullet has an amazing chase in it. But those aren't action movies. Those are movies that have a couple of action sequences. James Bond was action from start to finish. And the scenes in between were just as memorable, even though they didn't have all that amazing helicopters exploding and cars going off cliffs and rocket launchers and jetpacks and cars with smoke screens, oil slicks, and bulletproof shields that pop up. James Bond was the only game in town to get those movies. And the guy at the center of all of it was the unbelievable Sean Connery, with all his charisma and all his, that thing that you can't describe that only a few movie stars have. Sean Connery, man. So Goldfinger was 64, right after From Russia with Love. And then the next year, boom, they're right back at it with Thunderball. Tom Jones singing, he strikes, bum, 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 like Thunderball. Even Tom Jones admitted, I don't know what the lyrics mean, man. But Thunderball, with that underwater footage, I know a lot of modern day movie buffs do not go back in time to watch these older movies. But man, these movies are insane because they're 99% practical. There's model work, but most of the stunts, that's somebody doing it. Somebody skiing off a cliff. All that underwater stuff is really being filmed underwater. They're shooting things at each other. Thunderball is stellar filmmaking. They learned everything on Goldfinger and they upped the ante. Now, it's not as memorable to me as Goldfinger, but that's splitting hairs because they're both stellar movies. The next film, 1967's You Only Live Twice. They up it again because You Only Live Twice has the volcano hideout that, Austin Powers parodied so well. You Only Live Twice is an amazing movie. James Bond dies in the beginning so that he can go undercover. You only live twice, Mr. Bond. Oh. Yeah, I watched a lot of James Bond movies. I watched them just the other day. Austin bought some for me at Walmart, and I watched them. I'm trying to put together a whole set. And you know which one I can't find? View to a Kill. I can't find a copy of View to a Kill. Isn't that weird? Maybe it has something to do with the music rights with Duran Duran, but the only way currently to get View to a Kill is in a box set, and you end up buying like 6 movies I already own. View to a Kill of all the movies. So this is at the point where he decides to take a break, and he doesn't want to be James Bond anymore. And he makes a bunch of movies that I've never heard of. Shalako, The Red Tent, the Molly Maguires, the Anderson tapes. I haven't seen these movies. And the Broccolis decided to hire George Lazenby to do On Her Majesty's Secret Service. They recast Telly Savalas as Blofeld, and they tried to do it all over again. Now, I know that On Her Majesty's Secret Service is not a bad movie, and Lazenby's not bad as James Bond. The problem is, he ain't Sean Connery. And that can be said of, well, everybody, right? He ain't Sean Connery. So they offered Connery a boatload of money to come back as James Bond for Diamonds Are Forever. Diamonds Are Forever is not a great movie. It does feature some really good footage of old Vegas, especially Circus Circus. It's notable in that it has the first, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the first on-screen portrayal of a gay couple. And that's the 2 henchmen in the movie are a couple. They're a gay couple. That's badass, man. You know, that's progressive thinking. Don't you agree? Diamonds Are Forever, man. They really tried to recapture the Goldfinger magic, because Diamonds Are Forever features a theme song by Shirley Bassey, who sang Goldfinger. It has all the elements there. It's just not as memorable as Goldfinger. And for my personal taste, the reason I don't have it in that high esteem, the plot's not as amazing as Goldfinger. And the other thing, and this is across the board for my taste, there's something about the early 70s films. The makeup they used looks uncomfortable. That's just my take on it. The lighting is harsh. The makeup looks like look at Star Trek. That's television. But they used this thick pancake makeup. And as a guy who's been on stage and been on camera and worn camera and stage makeup, it's not comfortable. And maybe that's just me projecting onto the actor, like, I know they don't feel comfortable wearing all that. I know that they don't. And so I would guess that's part of it. And I guess that's just me. But there's something about the skin tone, and Diamonds Are Forever falls right in that, where they just don't look, they look plastic, but not in a good way. Not like in a Westworld way, but more in like it just looks like thick plastic makeup on their face. Again, just me. And that would close out his James Bond career until Never Say Never Again. But he did make a little bit of notable film between those two. And let's get to them, because one of them's a doozy. Where do you even begin with a movie like Zardoz? Zardoz is a movie you just can't believe exists. I remember I worked at Multi-Video in Bellflower, and we got Zardoz in on Laserdisc. And the early Laserdiscs, especially Warner Brothers, and I think Zardoz is Warner Brothers, they didn't put poster art on it. They just put some random picture from the movie. So the picture on the Zardoz Laserdisc, if I'm remembering correctly, is just Sean Connery in his costume. And if you've ever seen if you've seen Zardoz or any images from it, he basically wears a red diaper and a bandolier strap, and it's the craziest looking thing you've ever seen. It is proof positive of the drug use going on in Hollywood in the 1970s. Zardoz defies description. This is one of the many post-apocalyptic movies that were made during the time, because those were cheap to make, because it's easy just to go out to the desert and say, hey, it's the apocalypse, so nothing survived and everything's burnt, you know? And what a crazy movie. John Boorman directed it. I think he also directed the Emerald Forest, if I'm remembering correctly. He was known as a pretty avant-garde, big, for a while, big filmmaker. And Zardoz is this bizarre... It's a lot like A Boy and His Dog, if you've ever seen the Don Johnson Boy and His Dog. And it's like, here's the plot. It's the apocalypse, but a few people have survived that are elitist and rich, and they live in their own society, but they need an outsider to come in and have sex with women so that they can have babies and have more people. That's the plot of Boy and His Dog. That's the plot of Zardoz. The difference in Zardoz, they travel around in giant flying heads, they shoot lasers, and you find out at the end of the movie that it's called Zardoz because they took their cues for recreating society from a book they found that was destroyed called The Wizard of Oz. So Zard and then Oz. Bizarre movie. But, you can't fault it because it is what it is. The filmmakers in the 70s, this is all Zardoz is 1974. So this is pre-Jaws, pre-Star Wars, pre-summer blockbuster, and if you look at any of the movies from this time period, French Connection, Godfather, Chinatown, these are directors with clout making movies for themselves that would turn out to be movies that everybody loved because they were given freedom to just make movies. The movies back then didn't have to make $1 billion at the box office. They just had to make money and hopefully win a few Oscars for the studio. It's before things got crazy. It's before, we all know that George Lucas and Steven Spielberg changed the way we all looked at movies, and nobody cared about box office gross until Jaws and Star Wars. They just didn't. So a movie like Zardoz, a big studio picture that's crazy, seems natural at the time. Because they had a guy who walked in and said, look, I've got this amazing idea for a movie. I want you to finance it. I want you to make it. And I've got freaking Sean Connery to star in it. And they're like, Sean Connery, you're in. Let's make it. We don't care how crazy it is. And Zardoz is crazy. Then he makes a movie, Wind and the Lion. I've never seen it, but I know it's good. The Man Who Would Be King. Robin and Marian, about the later days of Robin Hood and Marian. The Next Man, A Bridge Too Far. The Great Train Robbery, 1978. That's a personal favorite of mine. That's Michael Crichton. I really dig that movie. I watched that not too long ago, and I was shocked at how much I owe my book series to that single movie. Now, I saw that movie, The Great Train Robbery, 1978. I saw that in the theater. My mother took me to see it. I have no idea why. I remember it vividly, and certain scenes, not the whole movie, but I watched it not that long ago, and I was floored at how great it is. Wow, it's got tense moments where they're trying to procure the copies of these keys so they can do the unthinkable and rob this train. It's a stellar piece of filmmaking. It's fun. It's got a great ending. The Great Train Robbery is a personal favorite of mine. Unfortunately, he would follow that up with Meteor, a movie nobody remembers, long before Armageddon or Deep Impact. A movie called Cuba, I've never heard of. And then another personal favorite of mine, 1981, Outland. And again, this is Connery sort of laying low for a bit. He's putting in these solid performances, but they're not watershed movies. They're not pop culture stepstones, If I said name a Sean Connery movie, you're always going to go to James Bond. If I go name it from the 80s, you're going to go right to The Untouchables. But there were movies in between that a lot of people just sort of gloss over because they don't want to, they're other movies. They're not part of that. They don't have that cultural zeitgeist in them. But they're great movies, and Outland is one of them. My friend Greg sat me down and I watched Outland at his house one time. It's a space movie about a cop who defies basically the space union, and they're all going to come get him. It's a Western set in outer space, and it's really good. It has Frances, what's her name, as the doctor, and she's almost doing a version of McCoy Bones from Star Trek. Outland is really good filmmaking. Same year, another classic movie that he's not the star of, but that's okay. Because when a movie is as good as Time Bandits, It has a lot of stars. It has David Warner. It has Sean Connery. It has John Cleese. You could do a whole episode on Time Bandits. I may have to sit down and break down how great Time Bandits is. But man, Time Bandits is great. And Connery's one of the standout sequences in that movie. Because Connery has the sequence where the little boy says, I don't want to leave. I'm going to stay here. This is better than my other life. And Connery's a good guy. And then suddenly, like when the thieves show up and take the little boy through the wormhole, away from Connery, you feel really dejected, man. You know, there's only a few moments in movies that have you feeling like, oh, what could have been? Like, as a writer, you know, that's the story you're going to tell. But when you instill in the audience the idea that it could have gone this way and it would have been good going that way, then you know you've got a good movie. You know, the other example that off the top of my head is when Sarah asks the worm how to get through the labyrinth. And the worm says, go that way and turn. And she goes, we'll never go that way because you would have gone straight to that castle. And the audience says, oh, she could have gone straight to the finish line, but we wouldn't have the movie. But you watch it, and every time you watch it, you go, just listen to the worm. Or don't listen to the worm because he's telling you not to go that way. But you should go that way. And that's the same moment you have when they grab the kid and take him away from Connery, and you're like, that's such a bummer. But that's good filmmaking. So then he does Wrong is Right, 5 Days, One Summer, Never Say Never Again. Never Say Never Again. He's back as James Bond. Of course, the title is a play on him saying he would never play Bond again, and yet here he is playing Bond. He looks tired. He, like I said, the toupee he's wearing is not good. Not good at all. I think in the opening of this movie, there's some crack at the other guy. I don't remember. I know that, what do you call it? On Her Majesty's Secret Service does that. And so does, there's one of the Roger Moore ones where it looks like Sean Connery and then he kills him or something. It's really strange. But yeah, no, Never Say Never Again is not very good. It's worth it as a curiosity piece. A personal favorite of a good friend of mine, my friend Steve, loves Sword of the Valiant. I've actually never seen it. I have no idea. I don't know. I'm sure it looks good. Then he does Highlander. Everybody loves Highlander. Highlander has a huge cult following. Highlander's a good movie. Highlander 2, The Quickening, not so good. But again, he's playing second fiddle to Christopher Lambert. He's like, look, I'll be the mentor. You be the star of this movie. I don't want to carry it. Then the next year, in 86, he does, or the same year as Highlander, he does The Name of the Rose. A lot of people have never heard of Name of the Rose. Name of the Rose, Connery plays a monk in the Dark Ages. Christian Slater is in it in one of his very early film roles after Legend of Billie Jean. Christian Slater's in it. F. Murray Abraham is in it, and it's a stellar piece of filmmaking. It is about monks who are mysteriously dying after reading a sacred book, and Connery has to get people to get past their superstitions and their religious bias and get to the truth of what's really going on. This is a forgotten movie. My drama teacher, Maggie, in high school, used to always recommend Name of the Rose to us. And when I finally sat down to watch it, I'm like, this movie's fantastic. I had no idea. And then Connery comes back, and I got the years wrong. He did Untouchables before Presidio. So Untouchables is the return of Sean Connery. This is Connery at the top of his game. As Jimmy Malone, the beat cop who helps Kevin Costner as Elliot Ness. God, I love The Untouchables. I watched The Untouchables when it debuted on home video. I did not see it in the theater. I was stupid. I didn't care for movies like that. I had to grow the hell up. But Brian De Palma's The Untouchables is a near-perfect movie.
You said you wanted to know how to get to Capone. Do you really want to get him? You see what I'm saying? What are you prepared to do?
Everything within the law.
And then what are you prepared to do? If If you open the ball on these people, Mr. Ness, you must be prepared to go all the way. Because they won't give up the fight until one of you is dead.
I want to get Capone. I don't know how to get him.
Want to get Capone? Here's how you get him. He pulls a knife, you pull a gun. He sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of his to the morgue. That's the Chicago way. That's how you get Capone. Now, do you want to do that? Are you ready to do that? I'm making you a deal. Do you want this deal?
I have sworn to put this man away with any and all legal means at my disposal, and I will do so.
Well, Lord hates a coward. Do you know what a blood oath is, Mr. Ness?
Yes.
Good, because you just took one.
It is the story of how Elliot Ness and his band of untouchables took down Al Capone. De Niro's in it. Charles Martin Smith is in it. It is, Andy Garcia's in it. And it is just such a good piece of filmmaking. It has oh my God moments. It has drama. It has comedy. It has everything you wanted. And Connery is stellar in this movie. He shines in it. And that's why they gave him the Oscar. A lot of times they will give an actor an Oscar later in life for a supporting role because they overlooked him the whole time. I mean, he was never going to win an Academy Award for James Bond. It's just not in the cards. But when they saw how good he was in The Untouchables, they're like, look, if we give him an Oscar for this, it's an apology Oscar for every time we passed him by. Same thing happened with Scorsese. He had to wait all the way until The Departed to win an Oscar after turning in Raging Bull and Goodfellas and Casino and all the movies that Scorsese did. Taxi Driver, for God's sake. But The Untouchables is, I could watch it today. I would sit down and I would watch it all the time. It's such a good movie. And I remember when I snuck into Paramount Studios that one time, one of the highlights was a display case that actually had the baby carriage from the finale that keeps falling down the stairs as they're having the final shootout. The Untouchables is stellar. Then Presidio, which I already discussed, is great. He has a cameo in a movie called Memories of Me. That's the movie about it's Billy Crystal and his dad is an extra in the movies. This is not a good movie, but it's notable in that when it came out, it didn't play in a lot of theaters, but every video store ordered like 10 copies because at the time, Billy Crystal had been on an upward trajectory of his career, and here he is in a movie that not a lot of people know, so they're going to rent it. So even though you've never heard of Memories of Me, who is the main guy? I always forget. He's in Casino. He's the union boss in Casino. But Memories of Me stars Alan King as a movie extra, and his Billy Crystal is his son. And Connery has a cameo in it. But then, for my generation, Connery cements his place. I mean, James Bond already. But when you play Indiana Jones's dad, it's hard to get higher than that. And as Professor Henry Jones Sr., he let us know everything we ever wanted to know about Indiana Jones, but didn't know how to ask it. Why Indy's the way he is. Why he acts the way that he does. And all the traits and fears and hopes and things that he got from his father. And we all know that good stories are always the search for the father. That's the base storyline. We're always looking for our father. In ourselves, in objects, in the man himself, in spirits, in religion. The hero's journey is the search for the Father. The movie is arguably about the search for the Holy Grail, but it's not. It's about Indy trying to find who his father is and come to terms with their relationship, and it's been strained, and they haven't spoken, and this adventure throws them back together. And as we, the audience, breathlessly go along on these amazing adventures and action set pieces, the heart of the movie is the relationship between Indiana Jones and his dad. And it's set up so beautifully in the beginning with River Phoenix, and then paid off so well at the end with Henry looking down at his son and for the first time calling him Indiana. Indiana, let it go. And Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones realizes, I don't need the Holy Grail. I need my father. And I'm about to cry, it's so good. I mean, when you look at these movies that used to be just popcorn movies, when you're a kid, you don't look at the subtext. You look at the movie, and it's like, oh man, he gets the Holy Grail, and the guy melts, and blah, blah, blah. No. It's a father accepting his son the way he is. You say you want to be Indiana, you're Indiana, and I will accept you as that. And Indiana Jones realizing he doesn't need the greatest treasure on earth because he already has it, and he just has to know enough to let the other one go and keep the one that he has. It's such a good father-son movie, and it's so much more than the sum of its parts. And it's so filled with fun moments that are better than all the special effects in the world. Watch the scene where they're having the motorcycle chase, and Indiana does something heroic, and when he looks down at his dad, Henry looks at him, scowls, and then looks at his watch, like, big deal. Or when the fighter plane is bearing down on them on the beach, and there's nowhere to hide and nowhere to go, and Henry Sr. uses his umbrella to scare the birds to wreck the plane and save the day, and he goes, I remembered my Charlemagne. And as he walks away, the camera moves in a way that only Spielberg can. The camera moves in and shows you that for the first time in his life, Indiana Jones is impressed by his father. And that's why we go to the movies. That's why we throw our popcorn. That's why we reach in the bottom of the M&M bag and they're all gone. And oh my God, what am I going to do? And look at what's happening on the screen. Oh man. It makes you want to watch these movies. When you talk about a guy's career like that, it just makes you want to delve right back in. After that, he did a movie called Family Business with Matthew Broderick and Dustin Hoffman. Nobody remembers this movie, and yet I saw it opening day because that's what I did back then. I was trying to explain to Josie how weird it is in the last 8 months to have gone to the movie one time to see one movie, Tenet, which was, because I used to go every week to the movies. I would go see movies I didn't care about just to go to the movies. Because even if the movie was mediocre or bad, you got to have popcorn and trailers, and the lights dimmed, and you were taken to another world. And in 1990, well, let's do the lead up. Because summer 89, I went to the movies sometimes twice or 3 times a week. If you look at the roster of films that came out summer 1989, the theaters were packed to the gills with good movies. And every time I went, I saw the same trailer. And sometimes I can't do it. The trailer for one of the Twilight movies played so many times that I would get up and leave the theater if it came on. And that happened with this summer. I saw the trailer for Hunt for Red October at least 25 times. And I was going to go see the movie regardless, but I couldn't take the trailer anymore. So I would get up and leave and go to the bathroom and come back. And then Hunt for Red October came out spring 1990.
So funny.
Well, the captain seems to think you're some sort of cowboy.
You по-русски.
Немного. Полезно знать, что думает противник. Не правда ли?
It is.
I doubt you'd remember, but we met once at the consulate in Leningrad. Along with your wife. I'm very sorry.
What gives you the right to fire on my ship? Your signal said nothing of a torpedo.
Ryan? It was necessary to maintain the illusion for your crew.
My crew are being rescued, yes?
As we speak.
You sent the signal.
That's correct, sir.
Then how did you know our reactor accident was false?
Well, that was a guess, but it seemed logical.
Very well. I present you the ballistic missile submarine Red October. My officers and I request asylum in the United States of America.
It's a pleasure, sir.
I mean, this is John McTiernan's follow-up. This is the guy who, he did Die Hard and then Predator. Boom, Hunt for Red October. McTiernan rules. Hunt for Red October is one of my favorite movies of all time. I've seen it so many times. I love every line of dialogue. I love this amazing cast that was assembled for this movie. Sean Connery, Alec Baldwin, James Earl Jones, Joss Ackland, Tim Curry, Jeffrey Jones, the great Scott Glenn, the great Scott Glenn. I love all these actors. Henry Jordan. Now, you're not going to tell me you lost another sub, are you? It's even got Fred, what's his name? The guy who's in every movie of that time period playing a bureaucrat. This is why you go to the movies. This is the best follow-up to Last Crusade you could have. Globe-trotting, big stakes, big toys. You've got big submarines, and they're doing maneuvers in the water, and they're shooting torpedoes, and the torpedoes, and the Dallas sub is going up and out of the water, and they go, the captain scared him out of the water. And then Tupelo, there's only room in Tupelo's heart for Tupelo. And he goes, you ignorant ass, you've killed us. And the same torpedo whips back around to blow up the other Russian sub. Hunt for Red October is why you go to the movies. This is a movie you should put on the TV, put the volume to 100, and let it blow you out of your own house. I love every lens flare. I love every tense moment. I mean, I didn't even mention it's got Sam Neill in it. Oh my God, the great Sam Neill. You know, I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna look up Red October on IMDb here because I don't want to miss anybody. Sean Connery, Alec Baldwin, Scott Glenn, Sam Neill, James Earl Jones, Joss Ackland, Richard Jordan, Tim Curry, Courtney B. Vance, Stellan Skarsgård, Jeffrey Jones, and Fred Thompson. And it's even got Rick Ducommun in it. Rick Ducommun, who was so good in The Burbs, playing the captain of the helicopter that gets him out to the Dallas. He's also the guy in McTiernan's Die Hard who shuts the power grid down and kills the lights. Rick Ducommun had a really good career for a while and just sort of went away, but he was mostly a stand-up. And I know that because I follow all these people, because I'm stupid and I'm crazy. But I do love Hunt for Red October. Then he did Russia House with Michelle Pfeiffer. Nobody remembers Russia House. Russia House was based on a novel by James Clavell. I think that's who did it. Same guy who did Shogun, I think. But it was Oscar bait. It was made to win Oscars and it didn't win any, so nobody remembers it. Highlander 2, The Quickening. I saw that opening day. That movie makes no sense. Everybody involved was using all the drugs left over from the 70s. And then he has a cameo, what I consider one of the greatest cameos of all time. He shows up at the end of Prince of Thieves as Good King Richard. And Good King Richard is mentioned throughout the movie, but you're never certain you're going to see him. And talk about a movie with, this is a big, big summer movie with a full toy line and trading cards, and it's Kevin Costner following up Dances with Wolves. And he can do anything he wants. And he ends up doing Prince of Thieves with director Kevin Reynolds, who would go on to direct him in Waterworld. And they would have this love-hate fight relationship for years. Prince of Thieves, Kevin Costner, Morgan Freeman, Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, Christian Slater, and of course, the great Alan Rickman, following up Die Hard with this another amazing villain turn. Prince of Thieves is not perfect, but it's a very entertaining movie with the theme song by Bryan Adams, Everything I Do for You. I love Prince of Thieves. I think it's romantic. I think it's exciting. I try to put it on and my family leaves the room, but I'm okay with that. And I actually have quite a few of the toys from Prince of Thieves. After that, he did McTiernan again. They did Medicine Man, about a guy who has a cure for cancer in the rainforest. This is right in that pocket of Earth Day and Saving the Planet and Save the Rainforest, and they made this movie. Lorraine Bracco followed up Goodfellas with this. Not really well known. Rising Sun, this is when they were buying every Michael Crichton property. Jurassic Park had just become the biggest movie in the world. And Rising Sun with Wesley Snipes, not a bad movie. Not a great movie, but not a bad movie. A Good Man in Africa, Just Cause, First Night, another sword movie with Richard Gere. Not a bad movie. Dragonheart. I actually have a soft spot for Dragonheart. That's the Dennis Quaid dragon movie, and Connery plays Draco, a talking dragon, which sounds ridiculous, but it's early, really well done, expensive CGI. Draco looks great. Looks like he's talking. It's not a bad movie. It's a lot like The Frighteners, where a guy comes into town and says, I'll protect you from this thing attacking you, whether it's ghosts or in Dragonheart's case, a dragon. But it turns out they're in cahoots and they're shysters. But Dragonheart had a full toy line. Think about that. Another movie with a full toy line. And then 1996, Summer, one of my favorite guilty pleasures of all time, The Rock. I love The Rock. I think The Rock it's Michael Bay right before he was given a blank check. So he kind of has to keep it in check, but not really. The Rock's ridiculous. It's over the top. It's silly. It's goofy. And it's unbelievably entertaining. As John Mason, the British secret agent who has all of America's secrets, Connery is fantastic against Nicolas Cage's Stanley Goodspeed, Ed Harris's Francis Hummel, who takes over Alcatraz. It has a lot of good character actors in it. It has Michael Biehn. It has Tony Todd. Just really, just a good movie. I dig it. It has Vanessa Marcel in Pigtails, which is never a bad thing at the beginning of the movie. It has Nicolas Cage at the beginning of his weird... he had done weird movies like Vampire's Kiss and Wild at Heart, but this is the beginning of his mainstream. You could say the same thing about Johnny Depp, where they're in weird movies, but then suddenly they're in a big studio picture, but they're still weird. I'm Stanley Goodspeed. I love the Beatles. I'm a Beatlemaniac. It's a strange movie. The next summer would give us Con Air, continuing Nicolas Cage is an action star? What the heck? But Connery was really good in that film, and yes, he butted heads with Michael Bay. There's a scene where him and Nicolas Cage have to swim underwater while fire goes over the top of them, and Connery didn't want to do it because they were going to do it for real, and he told Michael Bay he was an effing a-hole. But Michael Bay just shared recently a story of how the powers that be at Disney who funded that movie told Michael Bay that he was out of money and he would have to start trimming scenes out of the movie because they weren't going to give it to him. And Connery went in and said, look, let him make his movie, you idiots. You hired him. We're all here. Let's make a movie. And they said, we'll give you the money. And, it proves that Connery was a straight-up guy. Even if he didn't agree with the director, he was going to make sure the director got to make the movie that he wanted to make. And that's saying something. 2 years later, he would be in a movie that I consider one of the worst of all time, and that is The Avengers. Does anyone remember this movie but me? Connery plays the villain who can control the weather. Ralph Fiennes plays, what's his name? Patrick McNeil's character in The Avengers, John Steed. And Uma Thurman is Emma Peel. And it's a complete waste of everybody's time. At one point, Connery appears in a bear suit with all the bad guys dressed as furry bears. It's so freaking stupid, it hurts your head. It was one of the first movies I remember going to see and thinking, there's no magic formula to making a movie. Anybody can make a movie, because these guys obviously don't know what they're doing, because they're taking what was pretty good source material and they're just peeing all over it. After that, he did a movie called Playing by Heart, and then 1999's Entrapment. And Entrapment's sort of the beginning of the end, because it's him cast opposite Catherine Zeta-Jones. Everyone remembers the trailer. The trailer was famous for featuring Catherine Zeta-Jones' butt, because she's squeezing under lasers because they're thieves. Entrapment's a mediocre movie. He's doing his best in it, but he's too old to be with her. He's too old. He's too old to be trained. He's too old to be dating Catherine Zeta-Jones. I think she was in her 20s, and he's in his 60s or late 50s. I mean, he's got to be in his 60s. He's just too old. It's just too old. I think Connery was born in 1930, which would have made him 69 at the filming of Entrapment. I mean, that's ridiculous. And it shows. And you can trace that back to Roger Moore when he made his final James Bond movie, View to a Kill. His love interest in that is Tanya Roberts. And when Tanya Roberts brought her mom to the set, Roger Moore realized he was older than her. Like, he was too old for her mother. And that's when he said, fellas, this is going to be my last James Bond movie. That's a noble thing. That's a noble thing. But Entrapment is, it's escapist entertainment, but it's the beginning of the end. This is right in the time where Connery turns down two of the biggest movie parts of all time. He did not want to be in a franchise. He had already been James Bond. So when they offered him the part of Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, he turned it down. He didn't quite get it. He wasn't prepared to make 3 movies in a row because, most of Lord of the Rings was made in the 90s. The principal photography started years before release, and the first one came out in 2001. They weren't made in a week. It took years. Like Phantom Menace, these movies were made in the 90s using practical effects, long hours, and hard work. And I don't think he was ready to sign on for that at his age. So he turned down Gandalf. Of course, it went to Ian McKellen, who made himself a household name. Then he was also offered, instead he does Finding Forrester, which is a movie about writing a book, which is not the greatest topic for writing a movie, unless you're going to go esoterical on it. The trailer has him going, "You're the man, dog," and that became like a silly catchphrase for about 10 minutes. He did a TV documentary, and in this time period, he makes his second casting error. He turns down the role of Dumbledore. Think about that for a second. He turned down the role first of Gandalf and then of Dumbledore in the Harry Potter series. I'm not sure what he would have been like as Dumbledore. When you see the first 2 movies, Richard Harris is so perfectly cast as the J.K. Rowling version of Dumbledore, this twinkly-eyed, mischievous guy who runs this magic school. Dumbledore wouldn't become a hero until the later books. And Michael Gambon, who took over the role starting with Prisoner of Azkaban, is a different take on it. It's a complete different take on it. Harris's Dumbledore is totally different, and it's the one that I like the most. And I wonder what Connery would have been like in that role. It boggles the mind. Would he have done the whole series? Would he have bowed out? What would his Dumbledore would have looked like? But I think what happened was, this is just my theory, it's not true, is that he saw the two franchises he turned down become the biggest movie franchises of that time period. You know, Harry Potter keeping the same cast for each movie, 8 movies, is a revelation. The Lord of the Rings being 3 movies of that magnitude and making sense and being cohesive and entertaining and dramatic, those are revelations. Those are rare instances. Most movie series fall apart at least somewhere in the series. They just dip. They're gone. Those two didn't. They just didn't. And I think he got irritated. So he took on his last role. He wanted to be in a franchise. So he became Alan Quatermain in The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Now, that's a comic book by Alan Moore. The comic book is stellar. It is an amazing piece of literature. But as a movie, it is a piece of garbage. It really is. They took everything that was good about the comic and they jettisoned it to make this cheap, family-friendly, accessible, dumb movie. The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen graphic novel is about literature, and it's characters from literature coming together in this fantasy what-if scenario, and you have to know what it is. The movie just said, well, audiences are so stupid, so let's throw in Tom Sawyer, give him a car, and dumb it down to the nth degree, and oh man, what could have been. You know, this whole revival period right now where they're taking old franchises and redoing them, I would be so game for an 8-hour League of Extraordinary Gentlemen HBO miniseries that follows the story of the comic. That would be great. Check it out. I mean, it's so crazy that when they go to track down the Invisible Man, because it's Alan Quatermain and Mina Harker from Dracula, they go to this convent where the sisters, no, not convent, this all-girls religious school, Catholic schoolgirls, where they're all becoming pregnant by the Holy Spirit. And it turns out it's not the Holy Spirit, it's the Invisible Man. Oh my God, it's so crazy. But they were never going to do that in the film. And you knew that, but it sucks to dangle such a property in front of the audience and then turn in this completely unrelated piece of garbage. But that was the last time we saw Connery on the big screen. After that, he did voiceover as James Bond in a video game, and he did a cartoon that nobody heard of. And he rode off into the sunset, and he enjoyed 8 years of not working and being retired. They almost got him out of retirement for Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But I think when he saw that it would have been nothing but a cameo, he said, why bother? I don't need to revive the character for a cameo. I've said all I need to say, and I'm going to stay riding off into the sunset. Because if you watch Last Crusade, let's go back to Last Crusade. Let's end it on that note. Last Crusade ends with they leave the temple. Dust is coming out of it because they've destroyed it. The Grail Knight has fulfilled his obligations and can finally rest. The cup of Christ, the Holy Grail, is lost to time. And they get on their horses and they ask him what he found. And he says, illumination. Because the journey is over. He has found his son has found him. And they literally ride off into the sunset. Into a non-CGI, bravado, amazing piece of filmmaking where they found a sunset at the right moment and the right time, and they ride off into the sunset, and it goes dun 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 dun. You know, you are named after the dog. I love that dog. Yeah, dun 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 dun. That's Sean Connery, man, riding off into the sunset on his own terms, living a full life, leaving behind some of the most amazing pieces of cinema to be enjoyed now for the rest of our lives. Thank you, Mr. Connery, for giving us these movies, these moments that we can relive and live through. I love Sean Connery movies, even the dull ones, even League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I own. I own it. Why wouldn't I? So, thank you, Mr. Connery. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I hope you find some rest, because you lived a full life on your terms, and that's all anybody could ever ask. I'm Jeff Tucker, and this is 91 Reasons.
Foxtrot to dispatch, 1097, checking an open door at Officers Club.
1 Foxtrot, stand by for Unit 2 Bravo to back you up. Stay where you are, Patty Jean.
When I was an MP at the Presidio, he was my partner. What we got here is a multi-jurisdictional investigation involving the cooperation of the Army and the San Francisco Police Department. Now I'm the police party, sir.
I was prepared to cut you a little slack because of Patty Jean, so I'll let you do your Dirty Harry imitation. Well, your time's up. So listen real good to what I want to tell you. This is my command here. You watch your mouth and your hair. Do you understand me?
Yes, sir.
What is with you two anyway, huh?
I don't want you seeing him.
Is that an order?
He'll use you to get at me.
Don't wait up for me. I'm gonna be late.
It will take an investigation to make them confront the past.
It's come from Colonel Lawrence's talker on.
You can't stay on the Presidio forever. When you leave, I'll be waiting and I'll own your ass.
Whatever happened between you and Lawrence happened a long time ago. You were wrong then, and you're wrong now.
Your father and I don't like each other much. That's no big secret. I'm here because I'm interested in you, not your father.
Prove it.
What?
We could sit here and talk for a couple of hours and wonder what it would be like to be alone together. Or we could just cut to the chase.
Bad news, I love her.
So do I. You think that Lawrence is the only one involved in all this? Deal with CIA.
One man held by honor.
You knew. You damn knew.
The other driven by justice.
You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney now.
And a woman torn between them both. Sean Connery, Mark Harmon, Meg Ryan. The Presidio.